That is what it looks like when you start to follow God. And that is the honest truth in the beginning. Hello everyone, my name is Marquita, but you can call me Q. I'm here to help you grow in your faith and intimacy with God through biblical understanding and application of biblical truths. Today I'm coming with a quick video. I'm just going to be talking with you guys about the mistakes of the Hebrew Israelites in the wilderness and how, as believers and followers of Christ, we can really learn from and apply these lessons to our lives to see how we're being like the Hebrew Israelites in our lives, and how some of the actions they did have consequences, and how we repeat some of the same actions and we're experiencing some of the same consequences and don't even realize it. Because let's not lie, they made a lot of mistakes, a lot of decisions that go against God, that are in direct opposition of the laws and the precepts God has given us in His Word. And yes, at that time, they did not have the written word as we have now, but they still knew who God was. And eventually Moses gave them the commandments. And even before that, Moses gave them instructions and things from the Lord. And some of them just straight up disrespected, had no holy fear of God, did not care, and still did what they ought to not have done. So mistake number one we see repeated multiple times by the Hebrew Israelites is mistrust. Mistrust in God. Now, faith and trust are the same coin, but on opposite sides, like heads and tails. So the Hebrew Israelites had so much mistrust in God. At times, they demonstrated faith in God, but they still did not trust God, because they would quickly turn to idols and stuff like that when it looked like God would not pull through. Their faith and trust in God did not last long. It's like they kind of developed amnesia. God would perform a miracle and then they would quickly forget the work God just did for them. They only trusted and praised God after a victory. But in the in-between, when there was no victory in sight, when it just looked like battles, when it just looked like things they weren't going to get through, weren't going to persevere through, things they were struggling with, they forgot who the Lord their God was. Like, He didn't just part the Red Sea. Like, He didn't just give them manna and fed them in the wilderness. Like, He didn't just have water come out of a rock because they were thirsty. They quickly forgot these things. And when it came to a battle or something, they was acting like the Lord wouldn't be able to have the victory. But God just made a water come out of a rock. What you mean He can't have victory over your enemies? But they would quickly lack in trust in God and dependency and reliance on God, and finding God to be reliable and trustworthy of His character, His word, and who He said He was. And how often do we quickly do the same thing with God? We quickly forget that God is reliable. We quickly forget that we can depend on God. We quickly forget and we turn our backs on God, and we go into panic, we go into doubt, and we begin to worry. Like the Lord our God isn't the I am that I am, and that nothing is impossible for Him. Oh, how do we quickly forget how reliable our God truly is. During hard times, they would develop amnesia. They had a hard time staying rooted in God. They had a hard time staying planted in God. And for many of us, this happens because we have no foundation in God. We know of God, but we don't know who God is. We forget to know God for ourselves. We'll go to church on Sunday and that's it. We'll listen to a feel-good sermon and that's it. But we have no roots, no foundation in God because we don't know God for ourselves. We haven't given God the chance to taste and see that He is good because we don't even know who He is. Many of us can only say characteristics of God we learned in church. We can't say characteristics of God we learned from the Bible and getting to know God ourselves. And that's what the Hebrew Israelites lacked. They had a hard time staying rooted in God. Number 2 was complaining and murmuring. They complained and they murmured and they grumbled all the time. They had no patience. They didn't know how to rest in the Lord. They didn't know how to wait on the Lord's timing. And how many times, how often do believers do that? They had a woe is me complex, woe is me trait and syndrome. Oh, look what's going on in my life. Look how bad it is. God, why? God, you're mad at me. God, why are you doing this? God. Woe is me. They kept leaning into their own understanding. They never once tried to seek the face of the Lord, ask Him for strategy, ask Him for wisdom. Instead, they complained about what was being done or what was God doing, like it wasn't enough. Oh, Lord, you delivered us out of bondage, out of the place where we were getting beaten just to bring us out here to die. They weren't grateful. There was no gratitude in them. Every time something bad happened, it was as though they never experienced the goodness of God. Every time something bad happened, they instantly complained. The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5:7 to cast your burdens and your worries to God, for He cares. So instead of casting their burdens to God, they just complain. Lord, you brought us out here to die. You brought us out here to die of starvation. You brought us out here to die of thirst. You brought us here to die at the hands of the enemy. Instead of telling them, Lord, I'm thirsty. Please help me. Lord, I'm this. Please give me advice. Lord, I'm this. Please provide me with the strategy. Lord, I am so burdened by what is going on with my life. I need you to come through for me as my deliverer, just how you came through for me at the Red Sea. I need you to part some things again. They complained. There's a difference between giving God your burdens, casting them on Him, laying it at His feet and leaving it there, and then complaining. Complaining is constantly bringing it up again. When you cast, it is gone. It's gone, right? When you cast a fishing net, you throw it out in the sea, it's out there. You don't pick that thing back up until God tells you. You cast it out there. It is gone. So why are you complaining? Some of us are throwing our fishing net out there of complaints and then pulling it back up and the net is still empty. So we're complaining some more and we're throwing it back out there and pulling it up and the net's still empty. You're not giving God time to move. You're not giving God time to deliver you. Your woe is me. Constantly complaining, murmuring, and grumbling. Wait on the Lord. Be patient. Sit in His presence. Be diligent. Give Him time. The God doesn't move when we say move. That's not how it works. He sees all. He knows all. So his timing is better than our timing, however we perceive it. And we need to remember that. Number 3, the Hebrew Israelites idolized Egypt. When they were full of doubt, when they were full of complaint, the first thing they did was remember how great good old Egypt was that used to beat them all over the place. Okay? They used to throw hands at them. Oh, it was so marvelous now because God got me out here in the desert thirsty. Even though he did give me water out that rock, I had continual water in Egypt, even though I got beat down. They always thought back to how things were before they decided to follow God. How much easier things appeared in Egypt. Even though they were burdened, they were beaten, and they were bruised in Egypt. Oh Lord, I'm hungry. I had more meat in Egypt than this. They felt as though they never thirst or hungried in Egypt, even though that was a lie. Even though they were spiritually and emotionally dying in Egypt, they thought it was better there. When you first journey with God, you feel spiritually and emotionally satisfied, though it will appear as your physical world is falling apart. So that is what was happening with the Hebrew Israelites. Their physical world felt more structured and better together in Egypt, but they were spiritually and emotionally dying. And now they decided to follow God, and they're in the wilderness, and their spiritual and emotional health is better, but their physical world is falling apart. That is what it looks like when you start to follow God. And that is the honest truth in the beginning. Because God has to remove some things. God has to clear some things. God has to purge some things. God got to make room for himself in your heart. God got to build some things up, tear some things down. There's some pruning that got to go on. So yeah, your physical world starts to look crazy when you follow God. But if you truly press in and lean on God, he will not let you thirst or hunger. You will be spiritually and emotionally satisfied. And if you continuously, diligently seek after the Lord, you will get a peace beyond your understanding that you will never find in Egypt. So though you had all these physical things in Egypt, you were never satisfied. There was always a void there, because you were missing the thing that would complete you, and that is God. So never idolize your Egypt or hold idols before the Lord, because they will never fulfill you or sustain you the way the Lord your God does. Number 4 is their lack of faith in God. After every battle, they lacked faith. God would deliver their enemies to them. They would celebrate. They would see another enemy and be like, oh, we can't do that. That's too much for us. That problem too big. It was a vicious cycle of praise, faith, worship with forgetfulness, doubt, unbelief, and idolatry. They would constantly go in a cycle of praise and worship of God, having faith of God, and then they would forget what the Lord their God did. Then they would go into doubt. Then they would go to unbelief. Then they would go to fear, and then they would go to anxiety, and then here comes their idol, a golden calf, or they're back to idolizing and romanticizing Egypt. They easily drifted away from the Lord from fear, doubt, or temptation. And this is because, like I said earlier, they weren't rooted in God. They didn't have that foundation in God. They didn't know how to press into God. They didn't trust God, so they lacked faith. It's the same coin. They didn't trust God, so they lacked faith in God to come through time and time again. Even though God was showing himself as reliable, he was proving himself as reliable and faithful, but they still doubted and questioned God when it got rough. They never stayed rooted or anchored in the Lord. And that was their ultimate problem, was their forgetfulness of God and who he was. Their lack of trust and lack of faith in God is what got them delayed 40 years. Actually, it didn't even get them delayed. Everybody in that first generation didn't even get a chance to enter the promised land. It was actually their children that got to enter the promised land. You don't want that to happen to you, to be stuck in this vicious cycle with God that you can never enter your promised land. And now it's up for your child to continue on and do what you could not do because of your lack of faith, your doubt, and your mistrust in God. We need to learn from these lessons of the Hebrew Israelites. We need to learn from them, draw from these lessons, and apply them to our life. In what ways are you mistrusting God in your wilderness? You need to take that mistrust and view God as reliable, because he's proven himself to be reliable again and again. You need to figure out how you can lean on God. Ask him for strategy. He knows you. He created you. Ask God for strategy on how you can practically gain trust in him, because everyone's different and he knows what will work for you. So ask him how you can gain trust in him. Ask him how you can cast your worries and burdens and stop complaining and murmuring against him. Ask him how do you stop idolizing Egypt and come to recognize him as Jehovah Jireh in your life, your provider, your shepherd. He will give you the understanding, the revelation, and wisdom you need. Ask him to help you with unbelief in your life, your lack of faith in him in your life. Your unbelief in God shows your belief in something else, because you believe in something, it just ain't God. Maybe it's your idols. Maybe it's Egypt. Maybe it's you believe you can do it better than God can do it. You need to ask God to help you. Learn how to not make the same mistakes as the Hebrew Israelites in the wilderness so you don't get stuck there, because it's all about progression. So we need to figure out how to progress forward in our wilderness. Could what's keeping you stuck in the wilderness be one of these mistakes of the Hebrew Israelites? Your mistrusting God, your complaining, your idolization of Egypt and having idols over God, and your lack of faith in the Lord. Sit down and really reflect on these 4 points. Comment down below which 4 of these points do you think is holding you back? Which 4 of these points do you think is the mistake you're making, just like the Hebrew Israelites? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram, Faith Steps with God, for more biblical teaching and understanding. And remember to travel the road that requires faith. Bye.